The morning started like any other, gray skies pressing down on the city, the hum of traffic like a constant reminder of monotony. I sipped my lukewarm coffee, scrolling through emails, unaware that my life was about to pivot in a direction I couldn't even imagine. My inbox pinged, a single message with no subject, no sender name, only a cryptic attachment titled 2035 Evidence, PDF. My first instinct was to dismiss it, thinking it was some prank or phishing attempt. But something in me hesitated. Something told me not to ignore it. I clicked the file. The screen blinked, and suddenly, a torrent of information assaulted me. Blueprints, financial records, photographs, and video snippets, each piece meticulously labeled, each time-stamped years into the future. My heart raced as I realized what I was seeing. Detailed proof that my boss, the man I'd trusted implicitly for a decade, was orchestrating a scheme that would ruin countless lives. The numbers, the documents, even the subtle manipulations in emails, it was all there. My hands trembled as I scrolled, unable to believe the betrayal unfolding before me. But the strangest part wasn't the evidence itself, it was the sender. The message claimed to be from my future self, someone who had lived through the fallout and somehow managed to send a warning back in time. It seemed insane, impossible, yet the authenticity of the documents left no room for doubt. They bore the mark of precise insider knowledge, only I could know. Every detail of past meetings, confidential memos, and hidden contracts was laid bare. I leaned back in my chair, mind spinning. How could I act without alerting him? Every day I spent at the office was a risk, every conversation potentially a trap. I needed a plan, but the first step was understanding the scope of his deception. As I examined the files, a pattern emerged. He was preparing a massive acquisition that was framed as legitimate, yet underneath. It was designed to siphon billions through shell companies, leaving employees, investors, and small stakeholders utterly vulnerable. The timeline indicated the peak of his operations would begin in less than a month. Panic surged, but I forced myself to think clearly. My mind raced through strategies. If I could gather concrete evidence without exposing myself, I might have a chance to stop him. Yet the more I dug, the more intricate the web became. Each file led to another, like a labyrinth designed to trap the unwary. I realized that simply confronting him or going to authorities was not an option. The moment I acted, my entire life, even my career, could be at risk. The first video file was the most damning. It showed him in a private meeting, discussing offshore accounts with people I didn't recognize. He was confident, smug, unaware that the lens capturing him wasn't hypothetical, it was future-proofed, undeniable proof of his crimes. The thought that this footage existed somehow in my hands now made my stomach churn. Whoever sent this file had mastered timing, secrecy, and technology beyond anything I had ever encountered. I glanced at the clock. Hours had passed unnoticed. The office buzzed around me, colleagues immersed in their own routines, oblivious to the storm gathering in my inbox. I shut my laptop, trying to process the enormity of the situation. Every instinct screamed to flee, but logic insisted otherwise. I had to be patient, strategic, invisible. Every wrong move could trigger consequences beyond imagination. Night fell, and the city lights flickered like distant warnings. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed the footage, the spreadsheets, the subtle inconsistencies that only someone living it could spot. The evidence was overwhelming, yet it demanded action. I had to understand the full extent of his deception, but the sheer volume of information was paralyzing. I made a mental note. Step 1, map every transaction. Step 2, identify allies. Step 3, gather leverage without detection. But even this seemed naive. What if every ally was compromised? What if my actions were anticipated? I returned to the file, scrolling deeper. Hidden among the documents were personal messages, small confessions, mistakes my boss had made over the years. They painted a man far less invincible than he appeared. There were notes about cover-ups, subtle manipulations to avoid scrutiny, and plans to silence dissenters before they could threaten him. My stomach twisted. The realization hit me. I was not merely uncovering financial deceit. I was unraveling a carefully constructed empire of lies, one that had grown under my very nose. Then I saw it, a document labeled Project Aurora, immediate attention. The memo detailed an impending deal that would mark the pinnacle of his scheme. It included dates, figures, and predicted outcomes, all tied to entities I had never seen before. My pulse quickened. This was the moment where I could intervene if I acted perfectly. One mistake, and the fallout wouldn't just destroy him, it would destroy me. I closed my eyes, trying to think rationally. The sender had promised nothing but the file itself. There was no guidance, no step-by-step instructions, only the evidence and the implicit warning. You must act. The weight of responsibility was suffocating. I realized I was standing at a precipice, not just in my career, but in my very life. Each decision would ripple forward, shaping a future I could barely glimpse. Hours passed. I created a hidden folder on my secure drive, encrypting the evidence in layers. I double-checked everything, paranoid that even my own curiosity could leave traces. Then, almost reflexively, I drafted an initial plan, knowing that once I started, there would be no turning back. I had to be invisible, intelligent, unflinchingly careful. I had to dismantle him without leaving a hint that I was aware. The stakes were beyond comprehension. As dawn approached, I realized I hadn't eaten, hadn't slept, hadn't even breathed properly. My phone buzzed, a simple message from a colleague asking about a meeting. I responded mechanically, as if nothing had changed, but inside, my mind was a whirlwind. I was no longer the same person who had sipped coffee hours ago. I had been thrust into a game of shadows, where the prize was survival itself. And above all, one truth had crystallized. He could not be trusted. Not now, not ever. I looked out the window, the city bathed in the pale glow of morning, deceptively calm. I knew the next days would demand cunning, courage, and an unrelenting focus I had never summoned before. The file was only the beginning. The game had started, and I was already playing with fire. Every move mattered. Every second counted. And somewhere deep down, I understood a terrifying fact. The person who sent the file was not just a messenger. They were the key to the outcome. I leaned back, fingers trembling over the keyboard, and whispered to myself, if this is really me, then I have no choice but to win. The moment I stepped into the office that morning, the atmosphere seemed heavier than usual, though no one around me noticed. The hum of computers, the clicking of keyboards, the low murmur of conversations, all felt distant, as if I were observing from somewhere outside reality. My eyes, however, were focused. Every movement, every glance, every whispered word could hold a clue, a hint, or a danger I couldn't afford to ignore. I had a file from 2035 in my possession, proof of betrayal so profound it threatened to upend not only my career but everything I had believed about loyalty, trust, and power. I had spent the night mapping out a plan, creating encrypted folders, and preparing my workspace to move unnoticed. I couldn't alert anyone. Any leak could spell disaster. Even the smallest misstep would alert him. The file had made it painfully clear that my boss was not just corrupt. He was meticulous, calculating, and ruthless. I had to match that ruthlessness with patience and intelligence. My first objective was to identify patterns, corroborate the future evidence with present facts, and expose him slowly, without leaving a trail. I started with financial transactions. Hours passed as I cross-referenced numbers, tracing payments, invoices, and contracts back through the company's records. I had always known my boss was sharp, but seeing the depth of manipulation laid bare made my skin crawl. He had hidden billions behind shell companies, funneled resources through subsidiaries, and even manipulated stock projections to mislead shareholders. Each revelation felt like a blow, each document a dagger twisting deeper. Yet within that complexity, I noticed gaps, subtle oversights, repeated codes, timestamps that didn't align perfectly. If I could piece these gaps together, I could build an undeniable chain of proof that even he could not refute. It was around midday when a new email arrived. No sender, no subject, just a line. They are watching. Move carefully. My stomach dropped. My paranoia, already heightened by the 2035 file, spiked to a new level. Who was they? Were there others aware of the scheme? Or was this another piece of my future self's puzzle? I glanced around the office. The usual faces were there, laughing, typing, sipping coffee, unaware that a storm was unfolding in the cubicles around them. But somewhere in that crowd could be an ally or an enemy. Deciding to act, I requested a private meeting with a colleague I trusted implicitly. Lena had been with the company for over 15 years, quiet, observant, and fiercely intelligent. I needed someone I could confide in without risking exposure. In the small, unassuming conference room, I laid out a fraction of what I knew. Carefully, I presented discrepancies in financial reports, pointing out anomalies that even a trained auditor might overlook. Lena's eyes widened. The same disbelief I had felt hours ago mirrored in hers. This is serious," she whispered, voice barely audible. "If your suspicions are correct, this could destroy the company, and anyone connected could be at risk." I nodded.
Exactly.
"And we have to move slowly. We can't confront him directly."
Not yet.
"We need evidence, leverage, and a strategy to dismantle his plan from the inside." For the next few days, we operated in silence. Under the guise of routine work, we dug deeper, cross-referencing documents, interviewing low-level employees discreetly, and even observing meetings from afar. Every move required precision. Every glance at him had to be casual, nonchalant. The more we uncovered, the more intricate his deception appeared. He had manipulated not only finances but also perceptions, engineering a corporate narrative where he appeared as a visionary leader while secretly orchestrating chaos behind closed doors. Then came the first real shock, a hidden drive in the accounting department. Lena had noticed a discrepancy in inventory records, a minor anomaly that on its own meant nothing, but together with other anomalies, it hinted at an underlying pattern. I accessed the drive, my pulse racing. Inside were contracts, emails, and transaction records not logged in the official system. It was the smoking gun, the first tangible proof that I could use without relying solely on the 2035 file. But obtaining it was only the beginning. Storing, analyzing, and protecting this evidence was even more critical. I encrypted everything, mirrored the files in multiple secure locations, and created a network of digital safeguards. Every action had to be calculated. Even a single slip could trigger suspicion. And suspicion meant danger. Meanwhile, I began noticing subtle signs that he was aware, though not fully. A slight hesitation when I passed him in the hallway, a fleeting glance at my workstation, a question posed in passing about reports I wasn't working on. He hadn't confronted me, but the tension was tangible. The 2035 file had warned me that he was always one step ahead, and now I felt the reality of it pressing down. One evening, as the office emptied and the city lights shimmered through the windows, I stayed behind to review the most sensitive documents. The patterns in his manipulations were staggering, but also predictable. He had a signature, small habits repeated across years, tiny oversights that even his careful planning couldn't erase. It struck me then that the key to stopping him wasn't just the evidence, it was understanding him, anticipating his moves, and turning his own arrogance against him. The next morning, a package arrived at my desk. No sender, no markings, just a plain envelope. Inside was a USB drive and a note. "Trust no one, not even those who seem loyal. Use this wisely." I plugged the drive into a secure laptop, heart hammering. Files opened to reveal surveillance footage of board meetings, phone recordings, and even snippets of personal conversations I had never thought could be recorded. This was more than evidence. This was a roadmap to dismantling him. But it was also terrifying. Whoever had sent this had knowledge, access, and reach that I could barely comprehend. I realized then that my challenge was twofold. Not only did I have to stop him, but I also had to navigate a world where my own allies could be compromised, where every action had the potential to backfire. The 2035 file had given me a glimpse of the future, but the present was a battlefield, and I was armed only with intellect, caution, and a growing sense of desperation. By the end of the week, Lena and I had compiled a dossier, a structured, meticulous collection of evidence that, if presented correctly, could topple him. But presenting it was impossible without exposure. We needed a plan that was invisible, untraceable, and foolproof. And as I stared at the compiled documents late into the night, I realized something chilling. The person who had sent me the file from 2035 wasn't just warning me. They were guiding me, nudging me toward a path I had to follow, whether I wanted to or not. The city outside was silent now, the hum of life distant. I leaned back, exhausted but resolute. I knew that the coming days would demand courage I wasn't sure I possessed, but retreat was no longer an option. Every secret uncovered, every piece of evidence catalogued, every calculation made was a step toward confronting a man who had hidden his true self behind a mask of charm, authority, and deception. And as I closed my laptop, I felt the first real weight of inevitability. The game had begun in earnest, and I was already deep in the shadows of a war I hadn't chosen, but couldn't escape. The file from 2035 wasn't just a warning, it was a challenge, and I was determined to meet it head-on. Days passed, and the office hummed with its usual rhythm, yet for me, every second felt like navigating a minefield. Each interaction with my boss, every glance exchanged across the conference room, carried hidden significance. I had become a shadow within my own workplace, moving silently, observing constantly, calculating every word, every gesture. The dossier Lena and I had compiled weighed heavily on my mind. It was both a weapon and a burden. One wrong move, and everything we had uncovered could vanish in an instant. The first challenge arose unexpectedly. An urgent meeting was called with all department heads. Normally, I would have attended without concern, but now, my pulse raced at the thought of him, seated at the head of the table, the orchestrator of a scheme I had only begun to understand. The conference room was cold, sterile, the fluorescent lights harsh and unforgiving. My boss entered with his usual confident stride, an aura of authority masking the danger beneath. He greeted everyone warmly, but his eyes lingered on me for a fraction longer than normal, a subtle warning that he suspected something. My stomach tightened, yet I forced myself to remain composed. The meeting began with the usual updates, but soon his tone shifted. He discussed Project Aurora, the same initiative outlined in the 2035 file, and praised the team for its dedication in preparing for the upcoming acquisition. Every word was carefully crafted, a performance meant to reinforce his dominance and control. I listened intently, noting the discrepancies between what he presented and the evidence we had uncovered. Every carefully chosen phrase was a thread I could pull to unravel the facade. After the meeting, I retreated to my office, where Lena was already waiting. Her expression was tense, worry etched across her features. "He knows," she whispered as soon as the door closed. I saw it in his eyes. Something tipped him off. I nodded, acknowledging the unspoken truth. "We have to accelerate our plan. We can't afford hesitation. If he's aware, even partially, every second we wait increases the risk." We worked late into the night, cross-referencing files, updating timelines, and identifying potential vulnerabilities in his scheme. Each discovery was a mix of exhilaration and dread. The closer we got to exposing him, the more dangerous our position became. It was a delicate balance. Move too fast and we could be caught, move too slow, and he could solidify his control, making it impossible to stop him. Then came the first real threat. An anonymous email arrived on my secure account, a simple line. "Stop digging or you'll regret it." No attachment, no sender, just a warning. My hands trembled as I read it. This was no longer a game of passive observation. Someone was actively trying to intimidate me. The timing couldn't have been coincidental. It was after the meeting, after he had scrutinized me. I shared the message with Lena. She frowned, her fingers hovering over her laptop. "This is serious. Someone knows we're onto him. We need to be smarter, more cautious." The next day, subtle changes in the office confirmed our fears. My boss was watching more closely, questioning small details, probing for information. Every interaction felt like a test. He had grown suspicious, but he did not yet know the extent of what we had uncovered. That gave us a window, a dangerous, shrinking window, to to act. We decided to target his vulnerabilities discreetly. Using the hidden drive and the dossier, we traced a series of financial irregularities to a third-party consultant who had unknowingly facilitated some of his transactions. By leveraging this connection, we could create pressure points without directly implicating ourselves. The plan required precision and patience, but it was the best chance we had to destabilize him from within. The first move was subtle but effective. We scheduled an anonymous tip to the consultant, highlighting discrepancies in recent contracts and hinting at legal exposure. Almost immediately, the consultant began quietly questioning the decisions made by my boss, creating a ripple of doubt that started to spread through the network. It was a small victory, but it proved that his empire was not as invincible as it appeared. Yet, as our plan gained momentum, the danger escalated. One evening, as I left the office, I noticed a black SUV parked across the street, engine idling, headlights dimmed. My stomach dropped.
Someone was watching me.
I walked briskly, constantly checking reflections in windows, alleys, and puddles. The feeling of being hunted was suffocating. I knew then that the file from 2035 had warned me of these moments, the subtle escalation of danger, as I got closer to exposing the truth. Back home, I secured my apartment, double-checking locks, encrypting devices, and creating backups of the dossier in hidden digital vaults. Lena called, her voice shaky. "We have to be ready. He's going to make a move soon. We can't wait for him to come to us." I agreed silently, realizing the full weight of what we were facing. The man I had trusted, the one whose guidance I had once relied upon, was not only deceitful but now actively aggressive, and the stakes had become life-threatening. The following days were a blur of meticulous preparation and constant vigilance. Every meeting, every email, every casual remark was scrutinized for hidden meaning. We refined our strategy, planning contingencies for every possible outcome. The tension was relentless, gnawing at our focus, our confidence, our very sense of safety. And all the while, the file from 2035 loomed over us like a spectral guide, offering knowledge but no reassurance, a roadmap through a labyrinth of deceit and danger. Then, in a quiet moment, Lena discovered a breakthrough. Hidden within a series of encrypted spreadsheets were entries that directly contradicted statements made by my boss in board meetings. The evidence was irrefutable, and if revealed, it would shatter his credibility entirely. But even as we celebrated the discovery, we knew the true challenge was yet to come, delivering this evidence in a way that neutralized his power without triggering retaliation. And that's when the trap closed. It started as a minor discrepancy, a missing file, a misdirected email, but it escalated rapidly. Within hours, our actions had triggered a cascade of suspicion. Internal audits were suddenly initiated, colleagues were questioned, and subtle threats began surfacing. Someone was watching, following our every move, anticipating our strategy. My pulse raced as the reality hit. My boss was not just aware, he was orchestrating a counteroffensive, precise and unrelenting. Every move we made was being mirrored, every plan countered before it could unfold. I realized then the terrifying truth. The file from 2035 had not only warned me, but had also prepared me. It had given me the knowledge, the foresight, and the tools to act, but it could not fight for me. The responsibility, the danger, the necessity of decisive action, all rested squarely on my shoulders. Late that night, as I reviewed the dossier one more time, I understood that there was no turning back. The man I had once trusted, the architect of a web of lies, was now fully aware of our investigation. He would stop at nothing to protect himself, and the stakes had become far higher than I had anticipated. My heart pounded with fear, resolve, and determination. The next moves had to be perfect, calculated, and unstoppable. The city outside was quiet, the night deep and oppressive. I leaned back in my chair, fingers hovering over the keyboard, and whispered to myself, "This ends soon. One way or another, it ends now." The following morning, the office felt charged, as if the air itself had thickened. Every glance, every step, every word was layered with tension. My boss, once untouchable in his carefully constructed domain, now radiated a mixture of arrogance and unease. I could see the gears turning behind his eyes, calculating, probing, searching for weakness. The dossier we had compiled, combined with the subtle pressure we had applied through the consultant and other allies, had begun to unsettle him, but I knew he was capable of anything. Lena and I met in the quiet of the break room, a cramped, windowless space that offered privacy and a brief sense of security. We reviewed the plan one last time, rehearsing every step, every possible response, every escape route. The evidence was ready, the leverage identified, and the strategy laid bare. Yet the tension was unbearable. This was no longer a corporate game. This was a confrontation with a man who had proven ruthless, manipulative, and willing to destroy anyone who threatened his empire. By mid-afternoon, the opportunity presented itself. A high-level meeting had been scheduled, ostensibly to discuss Project Aurora, but it included key stakeholders who were still unaware of the full scope of the scheme. The timing was perfect. All the players were in one room, and I held the proof that could expose him completely. We entered the conference room calmly, presenting a facade of normalcy. My boss took his place at the head of the table, exuding confidence, unaware that the tide was turning. Lena sat beside me, a silent pillar of support, her fingers gripping the edge of her notebook as if drawing strength from it. I began the meeting with measured words, referencing reports and discrepancies, without revealing our hand immediately. He listened, his expression gradually hardening as subtle inconsistencies began surfacing. Then, at precisely the right moment, I revealed the first piece of evidence, a financial transaction trail connecting him directly to illicit accounts. Gasps rippled through the room. Stakeholders leaned forward, eyes widening in disbelief. My boss's face tightened, the mask slipping just enough to expose the tension beneath. I continued, presenting the encrypted spreadsheets, the hidden emails, and finally the damning video clips that documented him discussing offshore accounts, cover-ups, and manipulations. The room went silent, the weight of the revelations sinking in. My boss opened his mouth, attempting to control the narrative, but the evidence was overwhelming. Every excuse, every denial, every fabricated story crumbled under the scrutiny of unassailable proof. For the first time in years, the aura of invincibility that surrounded him shattered. Yet he did not panic, not outwardly. Instead, he shifted tactics, attempting intimidation, subtle threats, and coercion. But I was ready. I had anticipated every move, every manipulation, every potential counterattack. Lena discreetly activated our final safeguard, a secure, anonymous transmission of the dossier to regulatory authorities and media outlets. Within minutes, a network of oversight bodies, journalists, and auditors had access to the evidence. The walls were closing in, and he could sense it. Panic finally took hold. The confidence that had once defined him dissolved into desperation. He lashed out verbally, trying to undermine my credibility, accusing me of deceit, fabrication, and betrayal. But the room was no longer under his influence. The stakeholders, once loyal and unquestioning, now saw the truth. Their faces reflected shock, anger, and disbelief as they absorbed the undeniable facts laid before them. I maintained composure, every word calculated, every gesture deliberate. This was not a personal vendetta, it was justice, meticulously executed. I watched as his empire, built on manipulation and lies, began to collapse under the weight of its own deceit. And in that moment, I understood the full scope of the 2035 file. It had given me foresight, but it had also demanded courage, precision, and unwavering resolve. As the meeting concluded, authorities were called in, auditors began their formal investigations, and security personnel escorted him from the premises. The man who had once controlled every aspect of our professional lives was now exposed, powerless, and facing consequences that were both immediate and inevitable. The room, once tense with uncertainty, now breathed a collective sigh of relief. Lena and I exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of the long nights, the careful planning, and the unwavering determination that had brought us to this point. Yet, even in victory, the lesson was clear. The world was filled with deceit, manipulation, and hidden agendas. Trust was fragile, and power could corrupt even those who appeared most upright. I had uncovered the truth, dismantled a carefully constructed web of lies, and ensured justice prevailed, but the experience had changed me irrevocably. I was no longer naive, no longer complacent. The shadows of deceit would forever be a part of my awareness, a constant reminder that vigilance and intelligence were the only tools to navigate a world built on deception. Days later, as the dust settled, I reflected on the journey. The file from 2035 remained on my encrypted drive, a symbol of guidance, warning, and inevitability. It had given me the knowledge to act, but it had also demanded that I summon every ounce of courage, strategy, and resilience. Lena and I continued our work, now in a company slowly rebuilding trust and integrity, but the memory of the ordeal lingered. Each step forward was measured, cautious, yet imbued with a renewed sense of purpose. And though the immediate threat was neutralized, the implications resonated far beyond the office walls. The file from the future had not only altered the course of a company, it had altered my life. It had revealed the fragility of trust, the weight of responsibility, and the necessity of action in the face of deceit. I had faced a man who seemed untouchable, navigated a labyrinth of lies, and emerged victorious, but forever changed. In quiet moments, I would sometimes revisit the file, studying its contents, marveling at the foresight, and contemplating the possibilities. It was a reminder that knowledge could be both a gift and a burden, that the line between courage and recklessness was thin, and that the actions of one individual could ripple across time in ways unimaginable. The office had returned to its routine, yet I moved through it with a new awareness. Every decision, every interaction, every observation carried weight. I had seen the depths of deception, the complexity of human ambition, and the power of preparation. And I knew, with unwavering clarity, that the future was not fixed. It was shaped by those who dared to act, to confront, and to persevere, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. As I looked out the window at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like distant promises, I whispered to myself, "The truth always finds a way, and when it does, it changes everything." If you loved this thrilling journey of betrayal and revenge, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Future Fate Revenge for more mind-blowing stories.